Hi everyone, welcome to CCC's Curious Kitchen. I'm Claire and today we are making ginger snaps. Let's start with our ingredients. So in this bowl here I have my flour with a bunch of spices that are going to give our ginger snaps that nice spicy taste. Got salt, cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, of course, and the salt's going to enhance the flavors of these cookies. I have a lot of fresh ginger. In this bowl here, I have butter and sugar. I have both white granulated sugar and brown sugar, and we can talk about the difference between these two sugars and how they're going to affect the texture of the cookies soon. And then I have molasses to add really nice deep flavor. I have an egg that's going to contribute liquid, some fat for tenderness, some proteins for structure, and we have vanilla extract for flavor. The first thing I'm just going to do while my beaters are still clean is to blend my dry ingredients together. I forgot to mention there's also baking soda in here. So we want the baking soda and the spices to all be really nicely, evenly incorporated into the flour so that they'll be evenly incorporated throughout our cookies. Okay, just takes a few seconds and we have the spices to let us know when they're evenly blended. Next we're going to cream the butter with our sugars, and this is a really important step, not just for cookies but for a lot of cakes too. Because the sugar is actually going to bring air bubbles into the butter, and those bubbles are going to stay in the cookie and become bigger when we bake the cookie, and that's going to help the cookies expand and rise and also make them really tender. We are using a mix of both brown sugar and white sugar today. So white sugar is made up of what's called sucrose. It's a chemical. It's got two bits kind of linked together. One of those is glucose and the other is fructose, and together they make sucrose. Brown sugar is actually often made from white sugar these days, so it contains a lot of the sucrose, but it also contains a lot of just the one part, the fructose. Fructose is even better than sucrose is at absorbing water, so it's going to help keep our cookies nice and moist. I'm also going to add the fresh ginger to this mixture. So we often hear that fat is a flavor carrier. That's because a lot of the flavor compounds dissolve better in fat than they do in water. So if we add the ginger to the butter now, the fat in the butter can help really bring out that flavor. And that's also why when we, saute things, we often throw in the aromatics, the ginger, the garlic first. So this is all done. Just an important note is that the butter holds the air best when it's at room temperature. And all of my other ingredients are at room temperature so they can blend together really well. Next we're just going to add the rest of our wet ingredients. So the egg, the molasses, and the vanilla extract. So molasses is a syrup, so it contains sugar dissolved in water, and it contains a lot of fructose. So as I was saying before, white granulated sugar is sucrose. Brown sugar is just the fructose. Molasses also contains a lot of the fructose too. And it's also really acidic, which is why the leavener we're going to use is baking soda, because baking soda needs an acidic ingredient to react with. Now that our wet ingredients are incorporated, we are going to add the dry ingredients. So because these dry ingredients includes flour, we don't want to overbeat it once we add it into our wet ingredients. So as soon as flour touches water, which we have here from the molasses, from the egg white, and a little bit in the butter, it's going to start to form gluten. And the more we beat gluten, the more it develops, the tougher our cookie is going to be. For cookies, we want to minimize the amount of gluten we form. So once I put this in there, I'm going to stir just enough to combine everything and then stop. Now our cookie dough is ready. So because we're going to be rolling these into balls to shape them, I'm just gonna pop these into the fridge for a couple hours to let it firm up so that I can roll them between my hands. You can even refrigerate this overnight. That's gonna really help the flavors develop. But we'll come back and bake them when they're ready. All right, it's been a couple hours, so our cookie dough is now nice and firm, and it's scoopable, but it's cold enough that we could roll it between our hands. So what I'm just gonna do now is scoop up some cookie dough, roll it into a ball, pop it in some sugar, put it on my sheet, and kind of smush it flat. So for these ginger snaps, I want mine to be thin and crispy. So everything I'm doing from here on out is going to help that. For example, I'm pressing it flat, so it'll start off flatter and end up thinner as a cookie. And after this point, I'm not gonna put my cookie dough back in the refrigerator because one of the things that helps spread is the butter melting. So the warmer the butter is when it goes into the oven, the more it's gonna spread. Let's get started. Alright, so that's the first sheet. Since cookies are so small, they're really sensitive to kind of variation in, for example, oven temperature. So if I have the time, I do like to bake them one sheet at a time. We'll talk about this after I put these in the oven, but we also want to make sure the sheet itself, we bring it back to room temperature if we're reusing the same sheet. But let's get these in the oven. So as I was saying earlier, I want these cookies to be thin and crispy. And oven temperature is actually a great way to control that. So like I was saying, once the cookies go into the oven, the butter starts to melt, and that contributes a lot to the spread of the cookie. So once the butter melts, the cookie is gonna be essentially liquid and continue to flow and spread until the structure sets. So, the gluten in the flour, any eggs that we might have added, those proteins are going to solidify the cookie once they get hot enough. So the higher our oven temperature, the faster these proteins heat up and the faster the cookies solidify. And that usually makes them thicker. So for these cookies, I'm baking them at a lower temperature at like 325 degrees Fahrenheit, so that once the butter melts, it has more time for the cookie to kind of spread out and thin out before the proteins get hot enough to set. So because temperature is so important for the solidity of the butter, when we take this cookie sheet out, if we want to bake another pan of cookies on it, we want to make sure the sheet cools down first so the cookie doesn't start to melt while it's on the sheet. And this is especially important if you're trying to bake thick cookies. For these, I want the sheet to be at room temperature so that my timing for the bakes doesn't change between batches. Alright, these are cool. I'm just gonna slide these off. You can rinse the sheet under cold water to bring it back to room temperature, or I just kind of like to wave it around in the air for a bit. I'm gonna go through, bake off all of the cookies, but I'm just gonna let these cool and then they'll be ready to go. They smell so good and gingery, perfect for the fall or the winter. I hope you try these out.